We're in this new series. If you weren't here last week, we admitted that the series is the name is a bit of a mouthful, the Hidden Underbelly of Christmas, because there are, in fact, many things and many themes hidden in the Christmas story that we don't often get, that things that often many churches don't talk about, that we don't see in the Christmas movies, and yet these are themes that in my mind, right, in my heart, that actually can deepen and expand our understanding of Christmas, that we can celebrate and look to this season as a source of hope, not in spite of all that's going on, not just saying, I'm going to try to shut off all that's going on in the world for a moment and try to celebrate. No, actually seeing this season as holding a lot of hope for the very situations we face, right? That there's some themes embedded in this season that actually speak to the very things that we are going through as a society. And so maybe we can find extra meaning in Christmas this year. And so last week, we started with St. Nick. And we said, who was St. Nick really? And we found that the story of this person who lived around 1,800 years ago actually has incredible meaning for our world today and the systems of inequality that we face today. And so as we move forward through these hidden themes of Christmas, what I want to ask over the next 2 weeks is, why is Christmas Christmas? And more specifically, why is Christmas celebrated when it is? Because something that most historians and theologians agree on is that Jesus was not born on December 25th. And I don't want to come up here and ruin that for you. I hope that wasn't what your Christmas was built on. And we struggle. We have a lot of things ruined for us in this modern day and age with the internet, right? And documentaries. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, right? When I was a kid, I used to go to SeaWorld, and then a documentary ruined SeaWorld, and for valid reasons, right? You probably shouldn't go to SeaWorld. But, yeah, and then when I was, got a little older, there was another documentary, and it ruined another thing that I love, McDonald's chicken nuggets, right? I thought it was just an innocent thing, and then all of a sudden, no, McDonald's chicken nuggets, you do not want to know how they're made. And so we have things ruined for us. I'm sure that for you, someone who you once were inspired by or found to be a hero in the last 5 or 10 years, probably one of those people got ruined for you, right? Something got revealed. And again, that's just part of our modern world. But that is not my goal, to be up here and be the ruiner of Christmas. In fact, my hope is to add meaning to our Christmas story by recognizing that a lot of what we understand as modern tradition comes from an ancient world, and yet there is so much happening in that ancient world that holds true today, that can be a mirror for our own struggles and complications as a society, and we might find some meaning and hope in. Does that sound agreeable? Can we do that together? I want to just give you a brief history before we move on, just to set the stage. Okay, for the first 3 or 4 centuries after the death of Jesus, Christianity was an underground religion. It was not legal. And so if you ever peruse the New Testament, what you'll find is that these are mostly letters written among underground church communities in the Roman Empire of the first handful of centuries. And then something happened. Around the 4th century, there was a lot of political, religious unrest, and an emperor named Constantine looked at his empire, which was incredibly divided. You have this growing religion, Christianity, and he decides, you know what, if you can't beat them, join them. And so he basically says, let's just flip it. Let's make Christianity the state religion, and we can unite everyone under one common cause. Now, there's a lot of layers to this, because many people see this as the beginning of this beautiful, pure way of life and way of being in the world, all of a sudden becoming merged with empire and politics and military and economics. And so there's a lot that was problematic about this merger, but we have to acknowledge it as part of how we get to our modern world. And so what happened is that there was this decision to take the holidays of the Roman Empire, the celebrations of Roman tradition, and merge them with Christian tradition. And so when we look at why Christmas is celebrated on December 25th, much of it has to do with other Roman holidays that were celebrated at the same time in an attempt to bring tradition together for some familiarity, right? So there were 2 particular Roman holidays celebrated in late December. We're going to talk about these 2 over the next 2 weeks, and we're going to talk about the first one today. And what we understand about this is that you have a group of people who are accustomed to celebrating at this time of year, right? And so there was just this switch made. And I'm pretty impressed that they were able to make this level of a switch without the internet, without Facebook, right? Like, think about you. You've probably invited people to like a party over Facebook and no one showed up. And you're like, wow, I thought Facebook would work. And then these people did it in the Roman Empire. It's pretty impressive. And so somehow they figured it out. And we're going to talk about the first one today. The first holiday celebrated by the Romans that essentially got turned into the modern day Christmas celebration. And the first one is called Saturnalia, celebrated December 17th through December 23rd. Now, I teased in the newsletter this week that we were going to talk about a connection between Christmas and Saturn. And some of you are probably left perplexed by that. You were thinking, is Saturn in retrograde or something? I didn't hear about this. Not that I know of, okay? Not that I know of, but that is not the connection between Christmas and Saturn. See, you look at this holiday and the word that probably pops out to most of us is Saturn, right? And that would be the basis of this holiday. Now, we may know Saturn from such classics as space, right? This is actually a beautiful picture of Saturn, most recently taken by the James Webb Space Telescope. So it's a new picture, and Saturn says, thank you for showing a new picture of me, an updated, right? But this is real. And something to understand about our planets in our solar system is that they are named after Roman gods. And Roman gods are in many ways just rebrandings of Greek gods, okay? So any Roman god, Saturn in particular, is just a Greek god with a new name. And the Greek god that Saturn was essentially switched out for was Kronos. And Kronos is where we get words like chronology, chronological. So Kronos and Saturn, the god of time. And so Saturnalia was the celebration and the remembrance of another time, of a time past. And this time was seen as a sort of mythic era, a mythic golden age. A time in the past which there was no rule, that humans did not rule over one another. A time in the past in which there was no violence, there was no inequality. A time that we might consider to be like an Eden of sorts. Now, whether or not this time actually happened beyond mere glimpses, we don't know, right? But what we do know is that for these people, they saw this as a time in the past, a mythic golden age of sorts. And whether or not it actually happened, it's also a glimpse into what could be. And so it's a celebration, much like we say peace on earth, joy to the world, right? And whether or not there has ever been truly peace on earth, we believe that it's possible, right? And so these celebrations, and for Saturnalia, it was a belief in what might have been and what could be, and a reenactment of that together. And so this celebration that the Romans had celebrated for centuries before Christmas was marked by feasting, right? Which we know a lot about, right? The feasting has already begun for a lot of us for Christmas. Just me, I don't know. I've been to multiple Harley parties, and I'm full for the rest of the year. Saturnalia was marked by gift giving, which we know from our modern Christmas traditions. It was marked by lights and lighting candles during this darkest time of the year. So we can see some of these major traditions had made their way into Christmas. But there is one aspect of Saturnalia that has not yet made its way into Christmas that we don't yet quite do, or maybe we will never do, but I think is so profound that it lies within the roots of our Christmas tradition. And what happened during Saturnalia and for the Romans is that for this week, from December 17th through December 23rd, they enacted what we might know as a social inversion. And basically what happened is that the slaves and the masters would switch places, that there would be a reversal of roles, that those on the bottom would for a week be treated as though they were on top and vice versa. And they would even elect a king or a prince of the slaves who would rewrite the social hierarchy. Says Roman historian Nadia Williams, the Romans instituted Saturnalia because their society was so rigidly hierarchical that it needed a ritualized moment of reversal. That alone should tell us something about our own times. Now let's talk for a moment about what slavery looked like in the Roman Empire. Somewhat different than our modern understanding of slavery. In the Roman Empire, slavery wasn't so much based on race. It was more of an economic and military reality, which means you could be a slave if you were conquered by the Roman Empire. You could become a slave if you were in debt and could not pay your debts in the Roman Empire. You could become a slave as a punishment in the Roman Empire, which means that there could be slaves and slave owners who were from the same place, who looked exactly alike. Now, in many ways, we think about our circumstances today. We think about the disparity of wealth, right? And the situations that we might get stuck in today. And we realize that in many ways, this is not unlike the world that we live in. And so I want us to imagine for a moment what it would look like if we did Saturnalia, right? If those on the top of our society, even for just a week, experienced what it was like on the bottom, and vice versa. Like, imagine if Jeff Bezos switched places with his lowest paid factory worker and had to experience what that was like for a week. If that does not bring you joy, if that image does not bring you joy, I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. I was just picturing Jeff Bezos learning how to pee in a bottle, because they say that they don't really get bathroom breaks at Amazon, so that's sorry, it's a little dark, but anyway, Merry Christmas, everyone. Or imagine for a second political leaders or policymakers, right, of either side, right? But imagine them serving a meal to, say, a single mother who just lost her benefits, right? Or someone who is stuck at minimum wage, a minimum wage that hasn't, on a federal level, been changed since 2009, mind you. So can you imagine this? It almost seems impossible to imagine in our society, right? And yet, how was it that the Romans, who are known for having some of the most rigid hierarchies, economically, politically, of all of history, how is it that they enacted this ritual? Isn't it fascinating to think about? And really that perhaps it was just a glimpse at something greater, that they held a mirror up to their own society saying, hey, this social order which has become accepted and normal for us, it's actually thin and fragile and it's temporary. As historian Mary Beard says about Saturnalia, it was a reminder that social hierarchies are neither natural nor inevitable. By turning the world upside down for a few days, the Romans exposed how constructed their own power structures really were. Right? Now, here's the reality. Saturnalia itself did not end slavery, but it gave a glimpse of a world where all were one. And here is what's true. Given enough time, the Roman Empire did fall. And then beyond that, between the years 1800 and 1950, all modern nations outlawed slavery. So this way of, building things and this economic system that had become acceptable for thousands of years, in the span of just 150 years, all modern nations says this is not okay. This is not how we want to treat each other and be a society. See, Saturn, as the symbol of time, is also a representation of cycles of time. And when we think about cycles, we can see that Saturn was also a god of liberation, because given enough time, given the playing out of any cycle, all things are flipped, all things are reversed, all empires fall, the first become last, the meek shall inherit the earth. Does this sound familiar to any of us? When Jesus did grow up and he spoke about a new way of being and operating in the world, they often called it the upside down kingdom, because so much of the social order of the day was reversed. And this is true of so many of our great spiritual teachings, that given time, all things come back around. Order goes from disorder back into reorder. And we see this in our culture today. Everything comes back around. The mullet has found its way back into modern society. I know I've talked about this before, but this is a hill that I feel really strongly about. If the mullet can come back, anything can come back. Maybe even fashion of the early 2000s can come back. Maybe frosted tips will one day make its way back. I don't know. I hope not. But, given the evidence, it's possible. So now you might be thinking, look, this is all cool and interesting. Okay, Christmas is actually derived from celebrations that come from this other holiday, Saturnalia. Sure, that's interesting. What does that actually have to do with me? What does it have to do with us as a society? And what does that really actually have to do with Christmas? Think about the things that we all go through as individuals, maybe as a collective. And there are many times where it feels as though something has power over us or power over our situation. Saturn is a reminder that all things pass. That in many ways, for ancient people, Saturn also represented restoration, because in time, all things are restored. And this is a central theme of the Christmas story that many of us know and love. As Richard Rohr said, the Christmas story is about a God who refuses to play by the world's rules of domination. Instead, God comes small, hidden, and vulnerable, turning power on its head. Friends, sometimes our world and sometimes our lives feel upside down. It feels as though everything is reversed, is not as it should be. As a prop, I really wanted to figure out a way to do this message upside down, hanging from the rafters, but we don't have the budget for that yet. Maybe eventually we can get some kind of thing where I can, bungee myself. But if you can imagine looking at the world upside down, right? That sometimes it takes a complete inversion of things. Sometimes it takes us being upside down to actually see the world right side up. Are you with me? Right? Because sometimes there are things that we see in our culture or things that we have encountered in our lives. We need to invert them in order to find them as they should have been. Some of us grew up in families where the systems and the dynamics were pretty upside down, and it wasn't until growing older and maybe going on a healing journey that you needed to flip everything into realizing that was how you needed to get back right side up. Maybe you had a job at one point in your life where everything was so upside down, and it wasn't until later that you realized how much it was. And certainly when it comes to our world today, that it feels as though we need to look at things upside down just to see right side up. See, the last week and this week, we've been talking about systems, right? Not just individual things that we face, but systems that perpetuate inequality in our world, right? And maybe a word that you might think of when we talk about these things is political, but I think it goes far beyond that. Friends, it goes so much further than just left or right. In many ways, the left or right conversation really doesn't go far enough. In many ways, it's a distraction for what is really at the root. Because the left and right conversation, this dualistic conversation, always gets us saying, well, if only those people on the other side thought differently, then everything would be okay. And we're too busy fighting with our neighbors, with our brother and sisters, to realize that there have been systems at play for thousands of years that ultimately keep us separated, right? Systems of spiritual inequality where we see human beings as less than. And often our spirituality functions in this same way, that we need to operate under a complete reversal of our understanding in order to actually make sense of things. Spirituality often operates so backwards to how we would assume things would work, right? That often the best way to receive love is to give it. The best way to love is to let go. The best way to learn is to unlearn. How many of you have found a spiritual message that was so backwards and yet it felt true? It felt like going the opposite was actually going the right way. We see this in the solstice, right? That in the darkest time of year, we celebrate joy and warmth, right? In the depth of winter, we celebrate light amidst the darkness. And we see this in the Christmas story. We see the divine entering into the human, entering into the vulnerable, entering into the messy. It's all a reversal. And so, friends, when we face darkness and difficulty, may that be all the more reason for us to be unafraid to flip the script, because one day, whatever we're facing will end. One day, something new will come out of the old. As historian Ramsay McMullen comments about Saturnalia, it let Romans rehearse a world that was fairer, freer, and more humane. They could imagine justice even if they could not enact it. Part of what I love about being in a community like this is that we can come together, and in some ways we get to rehearse a better world, even if the larger society that we are in is not yet ready to fully move into that yet. Because when we do it here, I believe it makes an impact, that inch by inch we are getting closer to that world of unity, of oneness, of freedom. And we can at the same time recognize that something like Saturnalia, it did reveal that all social hierarchies are fictions. They are imagined. Any of you who are part of an HOA, you know this to be true, right? Our social order is fragile. All that has been made can be remade. So friends, here's my encouragement for us this Christmas, right? You might want to celebrate this Christmas, and yet you feel hesitant because you think, well, it's just temporary. We're celebrating for just a moment, and then we have to face the harsh realities of our world. But friends, I want to remind you that word temporary means of time. And all things are temporary, right? Because all things that we experience in this world are of time, which also means that all things pass. And impermanence is a central aspect of our understanding of what it means to be spiritual beings having a human experience. And Saturn can be looked at as a source of hope in that sense, that all things pass, that all things are impermanent. So if we want to see the world reimagined, we can choose that. We need to be willing to invite that. And we need to ask ourselves, what's that actually going to take? What would it actually take for us to live more in an interconnected way? What would it actually take for us to move beyond the hierarchies that seem to have so much power over us? What would that look like? What would that require of me? And if you feel lost and confused about where to start, just remember that we do have great spiritual teachings, such as the teachings of Jesus, or such as great art and music and poetry and spiritual practices that are roadmaps for what could be, right? That if we can look to what's possible, maybe it helps us usher that in ourselves, if we're just willing to imagine it, even as the Romans were for 1 week a year. As civil rights activist and theologian Howard Thurman said, the Christmas story is the announcement that a new order is breaking in, and that it begins in the hearts of those who will dare to imagine it. I want to dare us to imagine it today. I want to dare us to imagine something better than the way that we currently have as a society, as a species, than the current way that we take care of our planet, or lack thereof, right? Our lack of care for the planet. The way that we take care of each other or don't, right? The way that we are taught to treat ourselves and have self-love, or maybe not, right? The way that as a society we care or fail to care for the most vulnerable. The way that we see all beings as one. That's my question for us today. Are we willing to dare to imagine something better? And so here's my encouragement. Just for the next minute, I encourage you, if you feel comfortable, close your eyes or rest your gaze and just allow that to enter in, that you would imagine something better. What is this new and better world that you can imagine? And then how can you participate in it? Just take the next minute, and as you feel comfortable, just allow whatever comes through for you to come through.